Welcome to this episode of Consider It Blacklit. I am Kim Singleton, your host, and for those of you tuning in for the first time, Consider It Blacklit highlights films, television programs, and stage plays featuring African Americans up front and behind the scenes. We also discuss social issues as it relates to some of these programs and how they may or may not impact our communities. So, thank you for tuning in, and we hope you continue to tune in each week. Today, it is my extreme pleasure to have this gentleman on my show, Billy Mitchell. He is the ambassador, the historian, and tour guide extraordinaire for the world famous Apollo Theater. Welcome, Mr. Billy Mitchell.
It's so good to see you, my sister Kim. I mean, we've been trying to get this together for a long time, but things happen when the creator wants it to happen. So this is the right time and the right moment. So I'm honored to be here with you, sis, for real.
Yes, and I'm so excited for you to share your story because it's just amazing. I'm in awe every time I get a chance to sit down with you. But before we start talking about your life at the Apollo, I want people, because I read your book, and we're going to talk a little more about your book later on in the show. But I read your book, and your background is very interesting. Why don't you share with our audience how you grew up?
Well, I was born in as I call the great city of Mount Vernon, New York, and I am one of eventually 14 children that my mother gave birth to. We were very, very poor. Everybody has this story about their humble beginnings, but I guarantee you it was nothing like mine. Our family was split up in 1958 when I was 8 years old. I remember it, the day that the principal comes into the classroom, talks to my teacher, they're crying. Go to my brother's classes, same thing happens. The principal's talking, teacher, everybody's boo-hooing. We found out we had gotten evicted for the third time from where we lived in this cold water flat in Mount Vernon, New York, and they put all our furniture outside on the sidewalk. My dad rushed home from work. He and my mom had a big argument. Dad snatches up three of my sisters, and he leaves us forever. The rest of us were all placed in the foster care. So from the age of 8 till I was 13, I was in three different foster homes in Westchester County, New York, along with two of my brothers. And it was rough. We were able to get back with my mother. One of my brothers was adopted by someone else. Another brother stayed in foster care. My mom had the girls with her, etc. So that was my beginning in Mount Vernon. But it strengthened me. It made me also realize that I didn't ever want to live like that again. I was embarrassed. My family was embarrassed. People would point at us as we walked down the street because we were dirty, because we didn't bathe. We didn't have a lot of, plumbing things that most people had. For some reason, I don't know, because I wasn't in my parents' life like that. I didn't know why we were going through such hardships when my friends who lived in the projects across the street had, tubs and elevators and laundry rooms, and we had cold water flats with our bathrooms in the hallway. There were apartments on our floors, but each apartment had a stall. That's how I was raised as a young kid, and so that's my beginning. Yeah.
I think it's so important for you to share that. And why I wanted you to share that is because when you have determination and you want to make something out of your life, it doesn't matter where you come from. You are an example of that. So thank you for sharing that with our audience.
Yeah. And I also like to shout out my siblings. Not just myself. Some of them became real estate brokers, talk show hosts, nurses. Lawyers. So it's not like I'm the only one that got through. Some of my siblings went on to have wonderful careers, and because I was in foster care when I became an adult, my wife and I, we became foster parents just to give back.
Thank you for sharing. So, growing up, you were friends with someone famous, Denzel Washington. Why don't you share with our audience what your relationship was with him?
Yeah, like most of us that lived in Mount Vernon in the 50s and 60s, we were all members of the South Side Boys Club, all right? And and that foundation and that brotherhood that we had back then still exists to this day. And our members and our crew were all over the world, literally all over the world. So I first met we call him, everybody calls him Denzel, but his real name is Denzel.
Mm.
But I guess when the world found out who this, they started calling Denzel. We said, wait a minute, his name is Denzel. But anyway, I call him Denzel like everyone else, but I remember his father was a pastor in Mount Vernon, and he was known as Reverend Denzel Washington. But then we used to say people are saying his name wrong, either their ebonics are off or whatever. But Denzel and I still remain friends to this very day. Yeah, as a matter of fact, uh, I was in I had a small little part in a movie that he was in called Malcolm X. I was in the scene with Denzel. If you look back, you'll see a scene with me and Denzel, and that was like the highlight of my theater and film career because I've done other things, but to be in a scene with your boy, who is now like this guy, and we still stay in touch to this day, when we can.
Okay, let's start talking about your life at the Apollo.
Yeah.
How young were you when you started working there, and how did you start working there?
Right. Well, as I said, I was born and raised in Mount Vernon, and we got evicted from where we lived in Mount Vernon, and we moved to the South Bronx. And I had two older brothers and two older sisters that were so embarrassed by what we were going through, they went and left to live their own lives. At the age of 15, I became the man of the house because my dad and mom had broken up, and it was mommy, me, and and the siblings, right? And at one day, at 15 years old, my mother's crying hysterically one morning. I'm saying, Mom, what's wrong? What happened? She said, Billy, I don't have any food in the house for you guys. I said, Mom, no, we've been without food before. She said, no. When we were living in Mount Vernon, the local grocery stores would give my mother credit for groceries. We moved to the Bronx. These people didn't know who the heck my mother was. They wasn't giving her a dime, right? And she was hysterical because one morning we had no cereal, no milk, no juice, no nothing. And she says, Billy, I don't know what to do, but I want you to go down to Harlem because my mother was born in Harlem in 1923. May she rest in eternal peace, right? And she says, Billy, I want you to go down to Harlem on the bus from the Bronx and tell my cousin I need to borrow $20 from her and I'll give it back to her next week when I get my check because we were receiving welfare. My mom's cousin lived across the street from the backstage door of the Apollo, right? I go to get the money from her cousin, and the cousin wasn't home. I said, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because if I go home to the Bronx without this money, my mother would tear my behind up, right? So I says, I'm going to wait for her cousin to come home. So I'm walking up and down 126th Street, looking at the cousin's door, hoping she would come in. And I says, oh man, all of a sudden I started feeling dizzy. I didn't realize I was dehydrated. So I says, let me get out of the sun that's on that side of the street over into the shade. I walked over across the street to the shade and I'm walking down the street and all of a sudden this door opens up to this building and this man comes out and says, hey kid, what are you doing back here? I said, mister, I'm not doing anything. I'm waiting for my mom's cousin to come home. She lived across the street. He says, well, why are you waiting? Hey, you want to make some money? And I didn't know what this dude was talking about, right? I'm thinking some weirdo, right? So I said, he says, calm down, calm down. He says, my name is Frank Schiffman. I own this building. This is the Apollo Theater. And I says, wait a minute. I've heard of this place before because I'm from Mount Vernon in the Bronx. I've heard of the Apollo, but I had never been here before. He says, well, yeah, I'm Frank Schiffman, but there's some people inside rehearsing for a show and they're going to need someone to go get their coffee and their newspapers. And kid, if you run these errands, they'll give you a little tip. She says, so come on in. I said, no, sir, could you go first? Because I didn't want him to close the door behind me because I'm thinking weirdo, right? And he brings me in. And that day there was a tour going on called the Motor Town Review. It featured all of the Berry Gordy had put together this tour, and it featured all of his artists on his record label on a tour across America called the Motortown Review, and the Apollo was one of the stops. So Mr. Schiffman, may you rest in peace, my brother. He brings me and he started introducing me to the people I was going to run errands for. It was the Temptations, it was Smokey and the Miracles, it was Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, it was Junior Walker and the All Stars, it was Marvin Gaye, it was the Contours, and this very energetic, visually impaired kid by the name of Little Stevie Wonder. The first day I walk into Apollo, I'm running errands for them in 1965 when I was 15 years old. And that was my total introduction to working at the Apollo. First giving service and then later on being hired.
Wow. So, tell us The first major artist you interacted with and what that experience was like.
Oh God, I honestly don't remember the first major, but I remember back then running errands for people like Moms Mabley and Flip Wilson and James Brown and BB King, all those people back in those days. So those are my initial, early memories before later on, the Spinners, and the Delphonics and the Stylish, but as a young kid, I think it was mom, because I remember Mom's Mabley having a bunch of us come up to her house up in White Plains or Greenbergs to clean out of her garage. And yeah, we were about 16 or 17 years old. And I remember her giving us beer.
All right,
She,
moms.
she gave us some beer, but we weren't even old enough to drink beer. But she gave us some beer. I remember like it was, and Mom's Mabley was the first lady. I, I had one share this with Whoopi Goldberg that Mom's maybe was the first lady that I visually saw that wore men's clothes.
Mm.
When she was on stage, she had on the house dress and the hat and whatnot. And I was freaked out to see her after the show. She would put on men pants and men. I didn't understand her lifestyle, and I mentioned that to Whoopi. So Whoopi had a documentary, animated documentary, and they mentioned that conversation about me noticing mom's baby wearing men's clothes. But everyone knew but me, I guess apparently, that was her lifestyle. She was very funny, very generous, very if everybody if people on that's watching your show don't know who Jackie Mom's Mabel is, Google her. She was one of the most funniest African American female comedians ever.
Hmm. When I spoke to you in another interview, you told me a story about Ray Charles. Share that with the audience.
Yeah, yeah. I remember it had to be 1960. It's in the 60s. And I'm running errands for the Apollo. And in the back of the Apollo, there's a alleyway, right, where the artists used to barbecue, sit back there, drink their wine, take a little puff for everything, whatever they did back in the day. And they used to also, have card tables back there. And I remember one day Ray Charles was in concert, and I'm running errands. I'm watching everybody waiting to find who wants something from the store. And all of a sudden, this table gets like boom, and all of a sudden, people started cutting. And I'm saying, "Oh, what the heck's happening?" And then I ran because I was scared. Like I thought they were gonna start fighting. I would get hurt or get cut. Our brothers said, "Where they have their knives?" So I took off, and I found out later on that someone had accused Ray Charles of cheating playing cards. Now you say to yourself, how in the world can Ray Charles cheat and play cards at the same time? The man is visually impaired, or as they say, blind. Well, what happened was he was accused of making a mark on the side of a card to identify that card for whatever reason, it attribute to that game, and someone busted him. And that's when I was never so scared in my life because whoever when people are playing cards they just shoot dice back there, they were serious. They would talk stuff. Ah, come on, baby. What you got for this? Bow bow. And they playing cards. Yeah, what you got now? And I says, oh my God, these people are gonna get into a fight. I'm gonna get hurt. But I took off. But that was that Ray Charles story. I'll never forget it.
Wow. So we talked about Moms Mabley, we talked about Ray Charles.
Yeah.
What was your interaction like with Flip Wilson?
Well, I remember Flip Wilson never liked to use the dressing rooms at the Apollo Theater. He used to get dressed in a room downstairs underneath the stage. And I remember not you always knocking on his door. Mr. Wilson, is Billy, you want anything from the store? And he would never open up the door to that room. So what he would do is write what he wanted on a piece of paper and slide underneath the door. And I would run to the store and bring it back, knock on the door. Mr. Wilson, Billy, your stuff is here. All right, thank you. He would wait until he heard me walk up the stairs. There were some wooden stairs leading from the basement, the ground floor to the stage. And I think he would listen. And as soon as I got to the top, he would open up the door and pull the food in or whatever, right? And one day, I remember they were doing a sound check and the door to that room was open. So being with my little nosy ass, I go look inside, and there was a cart there. There was a pipe with all of his suits hanging on the pipe. There was a sink in the corner. And what happened was there were also hotels across the street from the Apollo, or hotels in there he could have used. But apparently he didn't want to stay at the hotels, or either he wanted to keep his money. So he stayed in this room when he performed at the Apollo. Excuse me. So over the years, I started telling the management about this room that Flip Wilson used to get dressed in. They say he never used to dress. I said, I don't remember him using dress room. He used the rooms here. So now there's a big sign that says the Flip Wilson room.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an
Yeah.
amazing story.
Yeah, Flip Wilson, funny comedian. When we saw him on TV, did all these characters. Geraldine Jones. What you see is what you get, and the devil made me do it. He never did that stuff at the Apollo. Never. Flip Wilson would be there with a mic in his hand, a cigarette or a drink, just like Red Fox they used to do, and they would tell jokes. I guess when he was summoned to go to California, Hollywood, they says, "Oh, we got to put some characters into here. So we're gonna have you do Geraldine Jones, we're gonna have you do the judge." But he never did those things at the Apollo. Never.
I think he probably knew his audience and he knew what they wanted to hear. So you mentioned Red Fox.
Yeah.
Did you have
Yeah.
any interaction with Red Fox?
Yeah, Red Fox was very, very generous. And I tell people this story all the time. I remember running errands for Red Fox, and I remember him sending me to the store. I think he told me to get him coffee, or told me to get him tea, but whatever he sent me to, I got the wrong thing, right? And I remember bringing it back to him, and he started screaming on me. Like, I don't know if he was having a bad day or what. He started, didn't I tell you to get, you stupid, you crazy little Maryland farmer. I told you. And he called me a Maryland farmer. So I accepted that beat down because I didn't know what he's talking about. So I go home that night. I said, Mommy, I thought you said you was from Harlem. She said, I am. What are you talking about? I said, well, Red Fox called me a little Maryland farmer. Like, are y'all from Maryland? She says, what you say? I said, he called me a little Maryland farmer. She said, he called you an MF. He called me an MF in code.
I
And
love
and
it.
and it went over my head, right? He didn't want to just outright call this little kid a MF, but he called me a Maryland farmer, right?
I'm
I,
going to start using that.
yeah, yeah. Somebody get in, let me tell you something, Maryland farmer.
In the words of Red Fox, you
In the
Maryland
words of Red Fox,
farmer.
Maryland farmer. That's right. Let me tell you something, Maryland farmer. You're farming with the wrong person.
I love
Woo!
it. I love it. Let's see, who
I've had
else?
right.
What about the Temptations?
Those are my guys. I remember the first day I met them was doing the Motortown Review when Barry did the tour. I remember, after that, they would come and perform at the Apollo Theater. And I remember one particular day, I walk up the stairs, I knock on the door to go answer the one thing from the store, right? Eddie Kendricks answers the door. I said, hey, Mr. Kendricks, hey, Billy, how you doing? I said, can I take any one thing from the store? He says, yeah, I want a chicken dinner with some mashed potatoes, some string beans, some biscuits. What do you want? So I started taking everybody's orders, right? And I remember looking at them, right? They were clean as the board of health. They had on these iridescent suits that was changing colors from green to like reddish, like, and their hair was processed, and the room smelled like cheap cologne because I think they all use different cologne. It was the smell that was like, what in the heck? And but I after I took their orders, I said, "Thank you, I'll be back in a few minutes." Right? They closed the door and they started rehearsing their repertoire for the show. And I remember them going, do, 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 do. I got sunshine, on a cloudy day, do, do, do. And I'm standing there, Kim, and I'm taking all this in, right? And these guys were like, they were all like 6 feet tall. I'm only 5'4", as you know, I'm a little brother, right? And these guys were tall and they were clean. And like, I was sitting there on the steps just to listen to all the songs that they were going to do on the show and the harmony that they had. I mean, those are moments that in particular was one of the greatest moments ever because I didn't knock on the doors until I heard them finish singing all the songs and the harmony that the Temps had. But then when you see them on the show and you see them doing that choreography that was taught to them by Charlie Atkins. See, Charlie Atkins was part of the Copaesthetics, which was him and Honey Coles. They were a tap dance group. And Honey Coles used to manage the Apollo Theater and Charlie Atkins was his partner. So Charlie taught the Temptations and all the Motown acts their choreography. And that's why the Temps was so different from everybody else with their choreography, because Charlie Atkins was the guy and taught those Temps how to do their thing. Plus, when you're tall, ladies like tall guys, and they just had their ways of spreading their arms and woo woo. Oh, I mean, people nowadays, they may think, particularly younger people, may not appreciate how cool watching the Temptations were. They see Boys to Men and New Edition nowadays, but you had to have seen the Temptations live and James Brown live, Michael Jackson live. I first saw Michael Jackson at the Apollo when he was 8 years old. When
Wow.
they first did amateur night, I was there running errands that night. It was either 1968 or 69. They were introduced as the Jackson Brothers. After they signed up with Motown, that's when they became known as the Jackson Five. But when they did amateur night, they were the Jackson Brothers. Mike was just a little boy, little boy.
Wow.
I've been so blessed. I've seen so much. I remember when I first met Taylor Swift at the Apollo. I remember introducing Paul McCartney in concert for Sirius XM. I remember meeting Bruce Springsteen and Tony Bennett and Bono and Metallica. Coldplay. All these white acts. People don't realize the great white acts perform the Apollo because everybody that's an entertainer in music aspires to play the greatest venues. And the Apollo is on the top list.
It's the world famous Apollo.
Famous.
So you also worked with Mr. Cooper. He is the person who started the amateur night at the Apollo. What was that like?
Well, the theater, the building that's now called the Apollo, wasn't always called the Apollo. The building was originally called Hertig and Siemens New Burlesque Theater. It was a burlesque house, and burlesque was banned in the early 1930s by a newly elected New York City mayor named Fiorello LaGuardia because burlesque was starting to become too vulgar, it was becoming risque, it was promoting prostitution because guys would get drunk and they would watch ladies lift up their dresses and show whatever the undergarments and stuff like that. Oh my God, look at those knees. So when burlesque was banned, the theater was shut down in 1932. 2 years later, Frank Schiffman, the guy who brought me in to run errands, his business partners, Leo Brecker, Morris Sussman, and Sidney Cohen, they purchased the building, which was an integrated burlesque house, by the way. So when they purchased, they says, okay, we're going to rename the building the 125th Street Apollo Theater, and we're going to start doing colored reviews. Color reviews are shows featuring black people, and they had done their homework. The reason why they started doing color reviews because they knew that the Harlem Renaissance had just ended, and all these blacks were moving into Harlem, because Harlem was first Irish, Italian, Latino, Dutch, and Jewish. When they opened up the theater and started doing color reviews, because the owners, Frank Schiff and them, that were Jewish, they didn't know black culture and who people would buy a ticket to see because they wanted to fill up the place. And
Mm.
Ralph says, well, my people are listening to jazz. So they started booking jazz acts, and the place was filled every night. So this happened over. Ralph told him about Louis Armstrong. Ralph told him about booking Duke Ellington, and then that same year, Ralph says, "Well, gentlemen, I help you out. Could you help me out?" And Ralph says, "As you know, I have a radio show, and which is a talent show. It's called the Harlem Amateur Hour Radio Show. I would like to bring it to the stage of your newly integrated Apollo Theater and do it from the stage." And they said, "Since you helped us out, you got the green light." Ralph brings the show there. He changed the name from the Harlem Amateur Hour Radio Show. He changed it to Amateur Night at the Apollo. And that same first year that Amateur Night started, there was a young lady, about 17, 18 years old, that came out, rubbed the Tree of Hope, which is tradition, and she won. She was the first to do it, and that was Ella Fitzgerald. Ralph taught me how to audition people because I used to co-produce Amateur Night with him. He taught me how to host shows and all this stuff.
I see, I see.
That's
So we
why I
talked about reviews. Tell us about the Jewel Box review.
it was fabulous. It was all male who were dressed like women. That was their lifestyle. You know, you could not tell that these men were not women with their makeup, with their wigs, with their body shapes, with all that stuff, but they were all very, very talented. You had 24 people, only one was a woman. And they used to put, yeah, only one of all the acts. Only one was a woman. So all these incredibly talented, you know, I don't know if they were transgender or whatever it was. It wasn't just, I'm just confused about that world because I'm not of it. I got a lot to learn. But anyway, I know that those shows were very successful at the Apollo Theater. I don't care whether you were straight or gay or in between. I don't care if you were a cool thug or whatever. People enjoyed coming to the Apollo to see those shows. It went on for a long time. The Jewel Box Review, and later on in the early 2000s, a producer by the name of Mary Flowers. I mean, she's still around, living down in Georgia. As a matter of fact, Mary Flowers was the first to bring hip hop concerts to the Apollo. A lot of people don't know that. She was a producer, worked with Percy Sutton at Inner City Broadcasting, came to the Apollo. But Mary Flowers came back with a show similar to the Jewel Box Review, and she called it The Fabulous Fakes, and it was sold out every single show. So that's the Jewel Box Review. It's RuPaul and them, they got shows like that on TV now and stuff like that, but that was a concert done at the Apollo called the Jewel Box Review. Very successful.
Wow, that's amazing. Just so much talent has run through the Apollo. And I'm just happy you were there to witness it so you could share it all with us. One of the events that took place at the Apollo I want to talk about is the funeral for James Brown.
Yeah. Ooh.
I remember I had a friend who was older than me who went there, and she had said that James Brown to her was like Prince was to me because I was a huge Prince fan. Were you there? And tell us what your experience was like paying tribute to this giant.
Yeah, I was absolutely there. Reverend Sharpton and Mr. Brown's family, headed by my friend is James Brown's daughter, Deanna, is a good friend of mine. So they were able to bring James Brown's body to be viewed at the Apollo Theater. And I had never seen that many people standing online. If you've ever been to Apollo, the lines went out the door, down the corner, up Adam Clayton Powell, up Frederick Douglass for blocks. I had never seen that many people standing on line, all in solidarity for the passing of James Brown. And there were celebrities online. So our security was walking up and down, seeing these big times, like, hey, so look, come on. They says, no, 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 we're gonna stay here like everyone else, and we're not gonna be, show us preference just because we are so who we are. And it was amazing to see that happening. They brought the people in, they walked up the stairs onto the stage. James Brown was there. You sat there, you said whatever you want to say, and then you walked out and you were out of the door. It went on all day from 9 a.m. to 9:30 that night. Hundreds of thousands of people, white, black, Latino. It was just incredible. They brought his body in a horse-drawn carriage, to the theater. One thing they did that was different, and it kind of like frightened me a little bit. Um, During the viewing of the body, they says we're gonna bring down the curtain and we're gonna change his clothes. And I'm standing on the side of the stage, and I said, "They're gonna do what?" They said they're gonna change his clothes. I said, "They're gonna take his body out," and they said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm out of here." I bounced, right? They had James Brown had on all blue at one time, and then when they changed his clothes, he had on all red. or either vice versa. He had on all red and they changed to blue. I know it's from blue to red or red to blue. And I didn't want to stick around because I've never seen, somebody lift a dead body out. I remember, I'm afraid. I remember when my mother, may she rest in peace, died. I was in the room with her at the nursing home, and I was afraid to be in there with my own mother. But I pushed it through because I said, she's not going to scare me. That's your mother. But I swear to you, I was frightened. And I did not want to see James Brown, whose body was already, stiff, have them change his clothes. Morticians, they get used to that stuff. But regular people like us, I don't know many of us that could deal with that. So that was the thing about James Brown. To answer your question, I was there. But that thing about them changing his clothes sticks with me all the time. And those of us that were there, they will know I'm telling the truth. The public probably didn't know because when you're coming in, you don't know whether you had on red or green or whatever color. You walked in, you saw it laying there, and then you got off the stage. But they did change his clothes, yeah.
I would have left too. That's a lot. That's a lot to handle.
And I tell people this all the time. There are live spirits in the Apollo Theater. I guarantee you. As far as ghosts, I don't know. I've never seen a ghost. Don't want to see a ghost. If I did see a ghost in that building, you will see a big hole in the wall. I'll run through that. Let me see a ghost up in there. But let me tell you, sis, and I'm so very honest with you, I feel something, some kind of energy. I don't know what it is. I tell people this all the time. Unless you're in my shoes, you don't know what I feel. I swear to you, I feel something. I feel protected. Sometimes I come there in the morning and the theater is pitch black and you're walking up and down the aisles to get the lights on. You hear the thing squeaking because it's an old building. The floor is squeaking. You're this, and you feel like there's somebody there next to you, watching you. When I do tours at the Apollo, I people sit in the seats in the auditorium. I never let anybody sit in the front row, ever. I leave the front row empty to pay homage. That's the seat that belongs to Ella Fitzgerald, Miles Davis, Michael Jackson, Prince, Luther Vandross, Johnny Cash. The list goes on. I don't let anybody sit in the front row because I tell people they are protecting me. I've been at the Apollo and worked there longer than anybody in the history of the Apollo. Not saying that to brag, but I'm saying that because these legends that have rocked the stage, they're protecting me and they want me to continue to tell their story as long as I can. So I feel there's some spirit and there's some. I'm not lying, Kim. I'm not lying. I know people always say he needs some therapy, but but you don't know how I feel. There is something. There's some energy in that place that is real. When you walk in the building, if you've never been there before, when you walk through the door of the auditorium, everybody knows it. They feel something. They can't even explain it, but they feel something.
It's powerful. So, one thing I like about the Apollo, over the years, it has been a place where we as a people can get on a stage and express ourselves
Yeah.
when other venues may not want us to. For example, when Billie Holiday sung Strange Fruit.
Ooh,
Nobody else wanted to hear it, but she sung it on the Apollo stage. When Chris Rock or Richard Pryor told their jokes and they talked about police brutality, even Ta-Nehisi Coates,
yeah.
who did there was a reading of his book Between the World and Me.
Wow.
So I always love how the Apollo is a space where
Mhm.
we as artists can come and express ourselves unapologetically.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
tell us in your words what the Apollo meant to our community.
Right. And that's part of our commission our a mission statement. A home for to express our we can come as we have used to have town hall meetings. And the topics were always related to what's happening in our community. And we can talk about it freely and openly, right? A lot of people may not want us to have these things talked about in certain venues, but that's what makes the Apollo Theater different. We service the Black community, African American community. That's who we serve. Everybody else is welcome to join the party, but we only serve our community, first of all, primarily. So any issue that faces our community, it can be expressed at the Apollo Theater. Now with us being in the Victoria, we have spaces now for if you're in the community and you got a piece that you want to work on, dance, theatrical, whatever, we got a space for you. Rather than you going downtown and getting stuck up with all those crazy prices. Of course, you got to pay something at the Victoria because we got to have a crew there, right? It won't be nearly like so. The Apollo Theater, we service the community. We want people to know that it's a place that you can have fun, the place also where we can come together and mourn. You know, that's a place where we come to create. We are black. We are black. We are blackity black, 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 black. We're not white owned. Well, the building is owned by the state. Let's be clear. We don't own the building. We run the theater. We have a deal with the state where the Apollo Theater Foundation, which is the name of our company, we run the theaters, the historic theater and the theaters in the Victoria. But the building's owned by the state of New York. That's what Percy Sutton did when he gave up the theater because the business model, his business model didn't work. And he said that himself. So I'm not saying anything out of line. He was putting too much money into the building. And because the theater's so small, you can't get back any money. It's only 1,500 seats. Nobody has theaters in New York making money with 1,500 seats. So Percy Sutton came to that realization. So he says, I got to give up the theater. He worked out a deal with the state to take over the Empire State Development Corporation. They says, okay, we'll take over, but we want to get out and continue this black excellence, the state says. So we're going to have this organization form, a non-for-profit called the Apollo Theater Foundation. That's who we are. We took over the building in 1992 after Mr. Sutton gave it up in 91. So we and our mission, you know, because we're not privately owned like Mr. We are a community event organization. So we promote and we do things for the black community. People really don't understand. We're not just there for shows. We're about black culture. You said somebody said I spoke to a lady earlier said she bought a T-shirt and someone stopped her and on the T-shirt says Apollo Theater for the culture. You know, that's why I came back to the Apollo Theater or came to Apollo 1984. It was about the culture because I gave up a better paying job to come work in the community at a cultural institution.
But I do want to circle back to your tours. I understand my favorite first lady
Mm.
specifically requested that you give her a tour of the Apollo. Share that with us.
That was, I think it was in 2010. The Obamas were in office. Management at the Apollo gets a call, says that that she's in town with a mother, daughter, and some friends, and they want to do a tour of the Apollo with this guy called Mr. Apollo, your boy, right? So she comes in with all this Secret Service people. You know, they closed off the streets around 125th Street. There are helicopters up in the air. I mean, it was crazy. And then when they come in, the Secret Service tells the staff, "I'm sorry, everybody has to go into their office and close the door. Uh, they're only allowing whoever she's giving the tour to escort her around." So the president of Apollo comes down and says, "Oh, hey, I'm so and so. I'm the president of Apollo." He said, "Thank you, ma'am. This is Mr. I am Mr. Obama, but you have to go back to your office." So I was the only one to take Miss Obama around. And while I'm talking to her, I'm kicking it, Kim, just like you and I talk. Because, uh, I was so honored to be in her presence because this is the first Black uh, wife of a president of the United States. So, again, we're talking about when Miss Obama came in, First Lady, she rolled with it, right? And I'm taking her around. And I'm talking about the history of my childhood and, foster homes and yada, yada, yada. She says, my God. She says, well, they prepare me, give me a profile on who I'm going to meet when I go to certain places. She says, "Yeah, I heard about your story, but I can't believe because you tell me things that they didn't." I said, "Sometimes they always like to tell you the good stuff. They don't like to tell you the bad things that happen in a person's life that you're going to meet." So I'm sharing that with you, man, just to let you know that I've been very fortunate to come up. And she says, "You know something? You need to write your book." I said, "What book?" You need to let people know about your story because everybody knows who Mr. Powell, but they don't know your background. I said, because they don't know because I don't talk about it. She says, you need to because it's inspiring. So that was a very short. So because I listen to women, see, I learned that a long time ago. Women are so smart.
So tell our audience about your book.
I took Miss Obama's advice. I sat down for a year and I just started writing stuff. I didn't know, that's writing stuff. And I didn't know what else. So I called up one of my friends who has written several books, a guy named Herb Boyd, right? And I said, Herb, man, I want you to edit this stuff and put what I wrote down into context, so people understand. Michelle Obama said I should write a book, not that she even knew. So I did. I wrote the book and I said, what am I going to entitle it? And I said, well, they call me Mr. Apollo, but that's not my name. I'm Billy Mitchell, you're right. And he says, Billy, you're dropping names in your manuscript that are celebrities. People are not going to believe these people. Do you have photos with all these people? I said, well, who are you talking about? He says, well, you mentioned Denzel, you mentioned Smokey, you mentioned James Brown, you mentioned Kim Field's father was your best man in your wedding. You mentioned this. Do you have photos? I said, yeah, I got photos of all of them. He says, we got to put them in the book. And that's why you'll see pictures of me and Denzel and the people from the boys club and all this stuff. My when I was dating my wife, there's a picture when I was dating my queen, and so much has happened since that book came out that people are asking me to write another one, and I probably will if the creator lets me live. I probably will write another one.
They Call Me Mr. Apollo is your book. Can you share with our audience where they can get your book?
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Cam. Folks, if you need to, or if you would like to receive a copy of They Call Me Mr. Apollo, my autobiography that I wrote, you can do it. There are two ways. One of my distributors is called blurb.com. That's blurb.com. You can purchase a copy of They Call Me Mr. Apollo through their website online, right? I think you have to have an account. Or I don't know, but I know that's how it's on blurb.com. Uh, and what Blurb does is they send me a check from the sale of that book. And then I send out a check every few months to these four youth groups, right? And I've never pocketed the money. I give them to these four youth groups that I've been sponsoring, but they give me a letter every year saying how much I've donated so that I can get a letter and I use it as a tax write off. I went to a gala last night for one of my groups, and went there as the keynote speaker, but with a check. The other way, you can reach me directly at my email address. You can reach out and says, Billy, I like the copy of your book. How can I get a copy? And my email address is nybb 329 at AOL.com. Again, that is N as in Nancy, yell, Y as in yellow, NYB as in boy, 3BBY329 at AOL.com. Let me do a little slow because I'm so excited. Kim's let me promote my book. It's NYBBY329 at AOL.com. Yes, I'm still doing AOL. For all you Gmail people saying, what in the world? Yes, I've still got AOL. So please support me so I can support the groups. As a matter of fact, let me tell you who the groups are. It's the Mount Vernon Southside Boys and Girls Club, right? Mount Vernon, New York, is Playing on the Edge basketball program, Harlem, New York. The other group is called Big Apple Leadership Academy of the Arts out of Brooklyn, New York. And the other group is called Creative Artworks. Creative Artworks are a group of young artists. Sometimes you might see murals painted on the sides of buildings, all these beautiful murals. That's some of them are creative artworks. They even have a mural of me on 119th Street and Manhattan Avenue in Harlem. It has Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Sojourner Truth, and Billy Mitchell handing a kid a book on 119th Street in Manhattan. It's been there for 7 years on the side of the PAL building in Harlem, 119th Street, Manhattan Avenue. So the other thing that I want people to be aware of, I just found this out maybe a month and a half ago. There's someone selling my book on Amazon for $98. used. I'm so serious. I'm trying to, maybe your listeners can tell me, how can I stop this? I already sent a notice to the Better Business Bureau saying how Amazon is allowing someone on their thing to sell a book, and they're stating, check what they're stating. If you think I'm kidding, when you finish, people can Google it. It says the last copy, and they're selling it used for $98 when you can get it at the Apollo for me for 26, signed autograph, or you can get it from Blurb, just, not signed, because the distributor is in San Francisco, so they'll send it to that person's address. But there's someone on, so don't buy. My point is, don't buy from Amazon, because that $98 is that's a ripoff. That's somebody that knows that the book is selling well, and they want a piece of of it as well.
Yeah. So the bottom line, everyone, do not get it from Amazon. Get it
Not.
from the places that Mr. Mitchell has mentioned. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, everyone, that's our time for today. Thank you so much, Mr. Mitchell, for sharing all this information and all this history with our audience. And audience, make sure you pick up his book. They Call Me Mr. Apollo. And until next time, consider yourself blacklit. Thank you.